When you're spotting individuals, you're looking for someone with vulnerabilities. You're right. People who aren't vulnerable, people who are balanced, don't get caught in these things. But as we know, Prince Andrew has a lot of vulnerabilities. And therefore, he probably was flattered by this man. The possibility of making money that this man flashed in front of him was probably something. So you look for people like this. You look for the vulnerable, and then you exploit their vulnerabilities. And I think that's exactly what happened in this situation. These kinds of individuals are really called access agents, and they are individuals that are used by the Chinese government to get somewhere that is otherwise inaccessible. So if the Chinese had approached Prince Andrew with somebody who was obviously from the Chinese government, he would have been alerted. But when a businessman comes and acts like all he's interested is finding contacts, finding British businessmen interested in doing import-export with China, the guard is down. And frankly, they do this in Germany, the United States, Canada, Australia. We see it all around the world. They've found it a very effective thing to have innocuous-looking businessmen come at major targets, politicians, now royalty. I must admit, this is the first time I've heard of royalty.
Yeah.
This is an unusual one in that regard.
Yeah, well, I mean, that in itself is fascinating as well. So he's described as a valuable communication channel. That's how he was viewed by the Chinese state. And we certainly know that this alleged spy, the suspected agent Yang Tengbo, did secure, he was invited to receptions, he was
Right.
involved in various programs that Prince Andrew set up. What is the usefulness to China of that sort of access?
Well, one of the things you've reported is that he got access to other politicians in the UK, or I should say two politicians. Now, that is something the Chinese really want because they want to influence these people on issues like Taiwan, Hong Kong, Xinjiang, the tough US policies on tariffs, semiconductors, decoupling. All of these issues are important to China. And this agent would look for people who would help the Chinese cause and who would argue perhaps against doing what the Americans want the UK to do, or who would argue that China shouldn't get involved on the Taiwan issue. So, as I think one of your reports said, the Chinese ambassador called him very valuable. And indeed, he would be able to go places and influence people that the ambassador couldn't.
Yeah. I find it so fascinating also because we've spoken to politicians in the past, or former politicians now, secretaries of state, they themselves have held office in government, and they have told us about how cautious they were. And there was one evening, I remember, a former education secretary saying she was sat with somebody at a dinner or whatever, and she was slightly concerned about their approach, how they were questioning her. And so
Right.
she reported
Right.
that and kind of kept her distance from there on out. Is that level of awareness that it seemingly Prince Andrew, who in the past has been described as a useful idiot, didn't seem to have? And that itself is slightly disconcerting.
Well, as a former intelligence officer, what I can tell you about the process is you spot, you assess, and you recruit. And when you're spotting individuals, you're looking for someone with vulnerabilities. You're right. People who aren't vulnerable, people who are balanced, don't get caught in these things. But as we know, Prince Andrew has a lot of vulnerabilities. And therefore, he probably was flattered by this man. The possibility of making money that this man flashed in front of him was probably something. So you look for people like this. You look for the vulnerable, and then you exploit their vulnerabilities. And I think that's exactly what happened in this situation.
Yeah. Is an operation like this, or that we're sort of beginning to unpick on behalf of the Chinese state, it feels like this is this would be a years-long project, or do they see results as they're going along? What counts as a win?
It's a little of both. They will test to see how far he will go for them. Will he, for example, provide secret information? Of course, we don't know whether he did or not. But that is something you test with a source. You see whether or not they're willing to go beyond what they should be doing. So over time, you test to see how far you can push the source. And of course, the other thing you're doing is building access to other people who may have vulnerabilities, who you may be able to also put into your network. The Chinese think in decades. This is a very real difference, I would say, between our intelligence services and the Chinese service. They are much more patient. They will take a long time. We don't have that kind of patience. But the Chinese have a long history of sometimes not using somebody for quite a bit of time and then activating the agent. So this is quite typical.
Yeah, I find that fascinating, and that's partly, presumably, because the Chinese state itself as an entity is quite consistent, whereas perhaps
Exactly.
Western democracies we change and our objectives.
Well, more importantly, the Communist Party is quite consistent.
Exactly. Yes.
Right.
I get you. I'd like your take as well, Dennis, as a former intelligence officer, on the fact in the Sunday Times reporting that MI5 questioned Prince Andrew's most senior aide about the clandestine relationship with this alleged Chinese spy. Just grade the level of seriousness for the domestic security service to have to take a senior aide to a senior royal for questioning.
Yes, I think that it was deemed to be quite serious. As I say, and I think it's right, this is a unique access. The ability to go into the royal family and what he could potentially provide in the way of secret information on UK military forces, the relationship in AUKUS between the United States, the United States, Australia, and the UK. There are a lot of areas where they would seek high-level access for information on the secrets. After all, you have nuclear weapons, you have nuclear submarines. They would be very interested in all of those things. Could they, through Prince Andrew, get to someone and get to information? That would be the kind of thing MI5 would be very worried about.